So in terms of the noise, we definitely don't want this roughness. We need like the big, smooth wobbles like this, especially when you see the reflection of like the environment. I think this is hitting that photorealistic look there. Hi guys, my name is Baradante. Here's a surprise Blender tutorial about how to make skyscrapers. I had to figure out some of this stuff when working on the recent project, and it turned out to be not as complicated as I thought. Actually, skyscrapers are like super simple. So of course you start with the like some kind of references, right? So we need to see the designs that actually make sense, and many of them are just ridiculously simple. Pretty much a grid. Sometimes it's a completely perfect grid like this. So you just look for whatever you find the most exciting for you. Some of them would include walls, some of them would be just this kind of stuff. Like these glass skyscrapers are looking really cool. I do like this kind of stuff sometimes because, you know, you get to play with at least two different materials. What the hell is going on there? So yeah, I'll probably go with this kind of pattern on them. A little line of like some kind of metal or plastic or whatever it would be, and a tall big glass, and then it's just repeating seamlessly all over the whole thing. Now in terms of measurements, all we need to know is like you can look up some kind of skyscraper blueprints to see some measurements. But one thing you just need to keep in mind is that these vary a lot in terms of like what the height of the floor would be. And as long as you think about it as like what kind of room would you be comfortable standing in? Well, I only know meters, so this doesn't make too much sense to me. If you think about like what's the tallest person usually is, like somewhere around 2 meters tall. So how much more of the height is needed for that person to be fitting normally into the place? Probably 2.5 to 3 meters, and I don't think you can go too wrong within those numbers, but also account for the concrete plate between the floors, plus maybe ventilation, something like that. So I think like actual 3 meters, maybe sometimes even more. Some floors can be just taller at like 4 meters tall. That's totally fine. Then we think about like the repeating pattern in the width. So in terms of like modern minimalistic skyscrapers is just pretty much one window and a little bit under it. So that would be like maybe a little bit over a meter, maybe a meter and a half. I don't think it will be wrong to just make it whatever you like it to be. That is, if you don't want to just look up precise references and everything. So we can simply start with a plane. I'll rotate it around Y, 90 degrees. That's the proper orientation. Good. And I'll place it like this. This is right now 2 by 2 meters. We can always look at this item information to see the dimensions. So this is a plane 2 by 2 meters. And yeah, we can grab an edge and move it to the left on the y-axis, negative 0.5 meters to have it something like this. So 2 meters like this right now. Let's lift these vertices up. Let's make it a bit roomy, so let's add 1 meter. So now we're 3 by 1.5 for this one window element. And I'll probably just apply transformation like this, and I build everything around the origin of the world. So when I just apply Control A, all transforms, the origin is actually at the bottom left corner of the thing. And the most exciting part about building something like this is that we get to work with instances right away. So instead of pressing Shift D to copy an element, we instead press Alt D. That's creating an instance. An instance is a copy that keeps repeating everything you do to it in all of its copies. So they're always the same, you can't change one of them. So I will move it y-axis 1.5 meters, which is our width of this pattern. And then right after I did this, while we still have this floating in here, I can press Shift R to just make a bunch of these. Next, we grab everything and hit Alt D, and we go Z-axis and we add those 3 meters and repeat that a bunch of times. And what's cool in this setup is that you can grab any instance of these things and like Control R, I would be able to add like a loop in here. Here are the tools to use, like loop cut, Control R. Then I would extrude this at like 5 centimeters, for instance, and we have this kind of look. And yeah, after we extrude, we can also go ahead and remove these on the sides. So we would just have this kind of pattern. I just hit the slash key on the keyboard to be able to see just one object that I'm editing. And now I would hit Ctrl R to add a loop, but before clicking, I would scroll up to have 2 of them. Then I hit escape to have them centered. Then I'll scale in Y-axis to introduce like this kind of frame on the sides. And we can go ahead and like move these frames on the X-axis. You can always look at the navigation gizmo right here to see where axes are in the world. So after hitting G, you hit X and you can move in the X axis. Another cool way to do it is actually you hit G to grab and then you move in the direction visually that you want it to follow. And then you click the scroll wheel and it will choose exactly that axis that fits the most in the direction that you moved the element by hand, which is a really cool thing. But right now I'll extrude at like 0.25 meters, so this way we have like a little protrusion. If I remove the wireframe, it looks like this. And this is our little frame between the windows. Also, in the reference, the windows are much taller than the bottom part, which makes a lot of sense considering the height of this element right now. And to see that, we just click on one of the elements that define the height of it. In this case, it's just this upper plane of it. And we look again into the item when we're in edit mode. There's global or local. In our case, like global would be like 13.5 meters because we're not at the first floor. But local would be measuring from the origin right here. So we can see exactly the height, that's 1.5 meters. So pretty much like only the person's head would stick out at the window. That's way too tall. We need to make it much lower. Maybe like 1 meter would do. Also, to be safe in Blender when you're moving stuff around and selecting it, most of the time it's best to stay in the X-ray mode, because without X-ray, if you select these vertices like this and start moving them, you will see that not all of them were selected and one of the vertices are left behind. That's because without X-ray, which is Alt-X to turn it on, you don't select stuff you're not seeing from your viewpoint, and with X-ray you can see all of them and you can select all of them. I'm still not used to it in Blender. I feel like this is a dumb thing to do. It shouldn't be connected to the visual representation of X-ray that I can't select something that I'm not seeing, because when we're selecting objects, they all get selected, but when you select elements, only the ones you're seeing are selected. I hate it. I don't really like looking at the X-ray mode a lot, but whatever, moving on. Right now, I think it's looking pretty cool in terms of the height of things. It seems like it's a bit taller here, and we also need to keep in mind that not all of this is necessarily just this is not where the feet of a person will be. Maybe that's exactly where the concrete plate is. So then we subtract that, like, I don't know, 20 centimeters from it, and then we can go 1.2, 20 centimeters. That's enough for a concrete plate, right? It may be 25, probably, but they're also, like, enforced with metal, so it's probably okay. Like, this is definitely looking pretty good to me. And really, at this point, we're kind of done. You can just keep on coming up with different designs, adding loops somewhere and making some kind of cool extrusions here and there. There are so many different designs of these things, so maybe it's like this, maybe it goes even crazier than that, and we can have some kind of line like this, and it may be of a different color, it may stay the same. When you keep the same color, you can get away with a lot of crazy detail, and it will play nicely in the sunlight or something like that. But of course, you can just follow realistic references if you want to. And by the way, after extruding and insetting and doing all kinds of stuff, make sure you clean up some of these extra polygons, because those sometimes may introduce weird artifacts of shadows at the big distance, because extra planes have to be calculated as a shadow, and if you remove it and have like this clean thing where everything just stacks into each other without all of these planes that are not supposed to be visible. It will just fit one into another perfectly without any issues, and you have less polygons to worry about. And of course, you can always select certain things and like Alt-C as a command to merge to the active point. So click this one, click that one, and the last one is where both of them will merge together. Another way to do it is when you have these selected, you hit M for merge, and in here we have at last, and it will merge over there. So yeah, we can remove it like this, or I can actually take advantage of it and introduce more little details. And I'll go back to the scene view and extrude this 1 centimeter like that. Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, it may make sense to clean up some of the vertices here and there, to have things cleaner. Sometimes there would be overlapping stuff or something like that, but it's definitely not necessary to do all of this. So yeah, having a clean stuff like this. At this point, I like switching to the actual Eevee view, throw some shaders on it to see what kind of look we're getting. So I would go ahead and create like 2 slots, and the second one I would make like a glass. So it's important to go to viewport display in the material settings and turn on that alpha blend, so we would see actual transparency as well as transparent shadows. And now I'll go into the edit mode. I'll select the single polygon of the glass we have here, and I would assign this dark material to the plane. So now we have 2 materials going on. Let's add a third one that will be the actual frame of the glass, which is usually just dark, but not always. Sometimes they are white. And I'll assign that. Yeah, this is how the materials would go. I can see how this thing could pretend to be the continuation of the line from the frame, so I will also assign this material to it. Maybe. Kinda hate it, so I'll remove that. So now let's add a sun, because we're actually doing look development now. And I'll just look for a certain angle where we would see something nice. In Eevee settings right here, we can go to shadows and look at the cascade size and increase that to 2K. That will improve the look. And we have some of that shadow going on right here. But what's most important is seeing the actual highlight from the sun. So this way we can start working on the different features of the materials. So I'll lower the roughness to almost 0. I like using like 0.01 because nothing is perfectly clean and some kind of diffusion still happens. So about transparency, it seems like I put a little object behind here, or a big one, to see the actual geometry transparency in Eevee, and there doesn't seem to be the best and like cleanest way to just turn on transparent glass, as far as I know. Like, we can go with the actual transmission and make the color white for the glass so it wouldn't be tinting, and we would still not see transparency, but like in cycles it would actually work while introducing pretty strong refraction. So if we would make index of refraction 1, that's how we would get the look of the transparent normal glass. But I think it's still like an intense way to do it. It's best to just go with a semi-transparent material that just has reflections. So this whole thing is a whole other subject, but the way I do it so it would work in Eevee is I use a very small alpha and I make the color actual black. So we would have like 0.1 transparency of the glass, which is like really transparent with a little bit of tint on it. So it's a nice shade, and right now I'll bring back index of refraction of 1.5, and we have that highlight from the sun, but we don't really catch a lot of the reflections of like the environment in this case. Even if I add like this cube right here, we won't really see the reflection of the cube anywhere, because when we use alpha of 0.1, that means the opacity of 0.1 applied to everything on the material, including the reflections. To compensate that, we can go into the specular section and look for index of refraction level here. This is how they renamed in the Blender 4 in Principled Shader 2.0. It used to be just called specular. the amount of specular, and 0.5 is like the physically appropriate number for just a plain surface. In most cases, on a plain surface, if we're not faking extra detail with whatever normal maps and whatever, 0.5 is where it should be always. But right now, we can like increase it a lot to compensate. So if we're 0.1 here, if we want to get to 1, that means we multiply by 10. But we want to get back to 0.5, so we multiply by 5. And this is just a hacky way to get back all of the reflectivity of the material that we want to actually keep transparent. It won't work if we have alpha at 0, because then there's like nothing to multiply with, and this will never give us any reflections. And yeah, with these numbers we get appropriate reflection on the mostly transparent glass right here. The only thing is, in EV, right now we're only seeing the environment reflections, even though in EV settings right here I have screen space reflections on, which is what's necessary to have, but we still won't see this cube reflected because EV doesn't support screen space reflections if we use actual alpha blend. To compensate for that, we can use alpha hashed, and this way we get this like noisy sampling of it. But now we're actually going to see at least something resembling this cube right here, even though it's like screen spaced, so it's not gonna work very consistently, but that's the reflection we can get. And of course, in cycles, everything will be reflecting with no compromise. I can see that cube being all dark in the reflection right there. And for the purpose of just modeling this building in EV, we can really just go with alpha blend and look at the reflection of the HDR texture over there, as well as our sun. So let's actually finish this building by selecting the whole wall and just hitting Alt D again and rotating around Z at minus 90 degrees and going here, and the number would be minus 25. Nope, maybe 26. 25.5. So yeah, it looks something like this. We can add like just a tall shape right here to hide this edge. Maybe there's some kind of element like that that would be at the edge of this building. So I'll scale it down to just apparently 20 centimeters thickness here and there. I will delete all of these polygons in the back. And right now it's important to apply the scale, or we can apply all transformation, because now when I select this, we'll actually see proper number here after you apply the scale. And now we can lift these two edges to 3 meters high, and that's where we can perfectly continue the shape as well. So I'll Alt D and lift it up 3 meters, and then repeat it as much as the amount of the floors we have here. Something like this. And the material should be that maybe frame. Is that okay? I think it is. So now I'll also duplicate this with Alt D. I'll rotate it minus 90 degrees and I'll move it along the x-axis 25 negative 0.5 meters. So we get the same thing going on here. And now we pretty much have this repeating wall that will perfectly fit into itself on all sides. So I'll Alt D this one. I will move it along the y-axis 25.5 meters. Now I'll rotate like this, and the way this rotates exactly around the bottom left point, or like the left edge, is because I have this object selected, or I could have this one selected. Both of them have the origin exactly at that point where we would want to rotate the wall at, but it's important to have the active element pivot point transformation mode used for this manipulation. So then all of the selection will rotate around the pivot point of the active element, the yellow one. So now we rotate minus 90 degrees and we have this. This is a proper orientation, right? Minus 90 degrees. Yes, it is. Also, we could do the same thing with both of these walls, but let's just keep going. And now I'll go into this projection mode and select both of these walls and clone them and go along the y-axis 25.5 meters. So now we have the double width of this building along the y-axis. Maybe a bit too long. I don't know, skyscraper look is a bit more narrow usually, at least something like this. And let's finally close up the whole thing. We have both edges on this side, and this wall is exactly what we need. So I can probably do a selection like this, and we get exactly everything we need. So now I will Alt-D and move along the y-axis a bunch of meters. In this case, we'll need to have a look at like where exactly the length ends, and it seems like it's 37.5 meters. With this random amount of windows I chose for the length of the skyscraper. So now I'll select one of the windows that are at the very corner here, and I will rotate along the z-axis 180 degrees, and I'll move it on the x-axis in the negative 25.5. No, that would be the positive. And here we are. This is, unless I missed something, it should be a perfectly aligned building everywhere. And if I never forgot to use Alt-D, all of the windows should be synchronized instances like this. So we can keep developing the design of the building to be something crazy if we want to. So for the ceiling, I'll just create another plane and go ahead and put it right here and see how exactly it should work. So for the roof, I'll just create a little square right here. I will align it exactly to have the origin at this corner, and then I'll move the vertices to exactly the dimensions of this building. So in here we have negative 25.5 meters along the x-axis for this placement, and these two are supposed to be, what was it, 37.5, I believe. Yep. That finishes our roof, except we need to go up. And that number is clearly 51 meter. So this way we have our roof perfectly placed. At this point, we can do a bunch of stuff with it. Again, you can look up some references, but I would just go ahead and extrude it up, maybe 1 meter. I would assume there's some kind of extra space necessary to do the maintenance part of the building at the top. Now I would extrude this side edge loop like this in place, and then I would hit Alt-S to introduce an even thickness all over the perimeter. 0.25 meter would probably look good. And then in here I hit I to inset, and we'll do maybe 0.5 meters and extrude again, negative 0.5 meters. Probably makes sense to do something like this. A bunch of maintenance elements on top of the building are definitely something to look up and add as well. What's interesting, in edit mode, you can hit Shift A and add primitives inside of your object you're editing. And we can just place this little something. Maybe it's, well, a ventilation unit, probably. It will be something like this. I don't think I'm gonna actually go into detailing it properly, but yeah, bevel is a huge command as well. So first of all, we Control R to add a loop, Escape to keep it centered, then we hit Control B, and now we can add a little something right here. Especially for classical buildings, it's really cool to add all kinds of features this way, including the profile type, so you can do certain things, but it will only show up on like the actual curving edge. In here, Control B, and we can add segments here, and we get all kinds of looks, which is really cool. One very important preset, like first of all, the default one will round things up perfectly like this, but in here we have support loops, which gives you a bit of a tighter look. I'm not sure why it needs to be like that, but it seems like it's creating some kind of very precise, nice curvature here. Let's actually keep it this way. I kind of like it. And let's actually do that on both of them then. Then we can also, of course, add a cylinder or something and have things going this way. And yeah, let's go ahead and use shade smooth by angle, and we have some kind of cylinders. It may be a good idea to add like vents as a texture in here or something like that. Like the rest of the detail is not necessary at all, and there should probably be more different stuff in here as well. In terms of the internals of the building, like what we see through the window, there is a whole bunch of ways of how to do it. But the whole point is you can create a general layout of the floor and then also create instances to duplicate it perfectly everywhere and maybe add some variation of some furniture and especially lights inside of it to have a more of a living look for the building. But generally you can simply have like a black thing going on with reflections, which is mostly the way buildings look like during the day. And for the distant buildings in your scene, it's probably the way to go anyway. Another important thing I wanted to talk about, and that's like the cool little detail, is that right now the building looks very unrealistic, and that's because all the glass is absolutely perfectly straight and perfectly aligned with each other, which is impossible unless this is a giant block of diamond or something, I don't know. But that's not the way skyscrapers have their glass look like. So in order to make it more variable, what we do is we can apply a noise to the normal. And so we create a noise texture node right here, and we grab color and use it for the normal map right here, and that would be the color that we plug it into, and we connect that to the normal of the shader. And right now it will be absolutely bonkers for several reasons. First of all, we hit Ctrl T if we have the Node Wrangler plugin turned on. And here we use maybe the object mode, so we don't have a lot of stretching going on. And after this, we definitely go with a much smaller scale to have things look a bit better. So 0.5, even less, maybe 0.25. This looks like an appropriate size, but now it's still incredibly intense. So let's go with 0.01 intensity, 0.02, and now we start getting some kind of variation on that shape. 0.05. Now it starts resembling an actual glass like this. But what's interesting, all of the glass is exactly bent the same way right now, because the texture of the noise starts at the origin of the object or whatever. So what's really cool is, like originally when you create the noise texture, it will have this 3D mode, but we can use the 4D mode. And 4D introduces this extra dimension, which is W, which means is just like you can just go through variations of it in the 4th dimension. It's cool to use it to animate the noise, like for water or something. So you can just create a driver where you would remove everything and just use frame information for that. And when you hit play, it will just be moving, and you can multiply it by 0.1 or something to make it slower. But we don't need any of that, so we delete the driver. What we do need is we need the object info. And in here we have this very convenient random output, and we plug that into the W, and that will just make sure that it randomizes the noise for each window, and it will be at a different phase. So in terms of the noise, we definitely don't want this roughness. We need like the big smooth wobbles like this. And by the way, I think if we look at the variation on our noise from glass to glass, it's still like looking very similar, is because the random number we generate here is between 0 and 1. So we need to increase that maybe by 100. So we would have like a strong difference between the noises of each glass. And now it's definitely different. So this is an important detail to have the real variation there. So here's the look, especially when you see the reflection of like the environment. I think this is hitting that photorealistic look there. I think I want to apply this frame material to these little parts, and maybe actually to these as well. Yeah, just like that. I can imagine this building taking place somewhere. Now, right now, I feel like maybe 0.075 is a bit too strong, so 0.05 is looking just right. And a tighter roughness like this will give us a pretty cool look. So yeah, this is it. Let me know what you guys think. The main trick here is that modern skyscrapers are very minimalistic and have a lot of very identical repeating elements, so it's very easy to build something like this with instances. And also that mostly skyscrapers are just glass, so if you pay attention to the way the glass looks with all these special variations and stuff like that, I think you will get a very realistic result at very minimal effort. Maybe even this looks a bit less ridiculous. Like, this normal mapping can be very subtle because even tiny differences in angles result in strong distortions at big distance reflections. So yeah, really try to dial it in as little as possible to still have the realistic look. So I think this is looking pretty good. So yeah, this is it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye! I wonder if it makes sense to add a noise texture to the roughness to have it not perfectly clean with incredibly tiny numbers, of course. Something like that. I would also lower that scale and maybe use the distortion slider as well to have it looking like some kind of smears of gross. And yeah, very, very small numbers. Oh yeah, I think that's exactly the look. It almost looks like even the clean window, but still realistically clean. Though they do clean those things with these special window wipers that don't really leave this kind of streaks, but maybe, you know, rain plus dust plus wind would make something like this happen. You can always think of more details to add, that's for sure.